Check, check. Check ourselves before we wreck ourselves. If we can, if we will. I think we should. Welcome back. Today, we're gonna start out with a little question to you guys. How many Lgrp comp frames are on the mat? So I'll give you a few seconds. Come up with your answer, and I'm guessing a lot of you guys are gonna say 3, which is totally wrong, because in my mind, the juices are always flowing, creativity's always at work. I've always got something that I'm thinking about, and I'm definitely seeing 4 comp frames on this mat. So you guys need to check your math, because that is what we're doing today. We're gonna dive into a brand new ground up build here to give this set another midnight edition. So we'll equal it out. So we'll have 2 black frames. We're gonna have 2 anodized frames. So without further delay, why don't we look at some of the other parts and pieces we're gonna use on this build. So luckily, I've got a box of little guy parts that I think is going to help us accomplish this build. Oh hell, that's not gonna work. All right, this feels much better. You know I like things organized, guys. So I've got this basically in an exploded view here on the mat. So this is all you get in the comp frame kit, plastic and metal all mixed together. And of course you get that full link set, which is super nice. Color-coded hardware in the upper left. And now they are shipping these with this color-coded assembly diagram. So it makes putting this together a breeze. So very user-friendly, a big plus for little guy in that department. No other chassis I've seen comes with that detailed instruction. So super nice there, but of course I've got a few substitutions I'm gonna throw at this, kind of some of the usual suspects to swap out some plastic for aluminum, but I've got one kind of cool new item that I think is gonna take this up a notch. All right, 4 more little guy baggies here. The shock towers, braces, and sliders there in aluminum, but the cool new item that they're offering is hardware kits in black, and they have one in gold as well. So I picked up both, but of course black is gonna be the way to go on this midnight frame. It's really cool that they're offering you kind of some ways to dress up your frame to make it unique. So without further delay, I'm gonna jump into the instruction sheet here, make these substitutions, get this frame assembled, and we'll see what's next. Here we are, back with this gorgeous, completely blacked out midnight edition comp frame, and that just looks fantastic with all black hardware. And this guy was just a pleasure to build as always, just a fantastic design. So this is built as the instructions state, basically per spec minus one little thing. So you may not can tell what that is, but I'll flip it over. I've actually got my first non-Lgrp parts on this thing. So if you're familiar with any of my comp frame builds, you'll recognize this little tweak here. So these are actually Injora front steering links here, 2 sets. So I've got one on each side as basically a double bend front lower. So these guys plus a 1mm spacer there gives me just a little bit more length on the lowers than the stock blades, and I'll show a picture of that. So about 63mm there, eye to eye on this. So what that does basically is it affects where the axle sits, it affects the caster, and it ultimately gets the servo and the tabs living within the wide spot here of the frame, and that's what I want. So something that I would typically do further down the build with tuning, I can already take care of now because I've done it and I know what I want in the end. So for those uppers, front and rear, you can see the positions on both of them. They're on the top row and they're both mounted to the rear. So that's the start right now. And of course the rear ones you can put where you want, but the front ones, because I've got this double bend and they kick up right there, you've got to have these uppers on this rear location so you don't get any bind as you flex. And that again is something I've already learned. So this chassis should be good to go as it's set up now. I might tweak the rear shock tower, but again, the front is set by this cage right here. So we haven't even really discussed body. We'll get to that down the road. But I think for now, we've got the chassis licked and we're gonna move on to the next step, which of course is axles. 6 more little guy bags, and we've got 2 complete midnight aluminum axle assemblies. And I say complete because they say complete, but we're both lying because nothing is complete in this world ever, right? So you've got to add a little more money to them to make it a complete axle. So they need hexes. So I've picked up the 4mm, which are +1s. So these are very handy in giving you just a little more clearance. Then of course for the rear, you've got to have a link mount. So I picked up the little guy link mount. There is no riser option, but you get all that adjustability on the frame. So it's not really needed in this case. And of course, I picked up a servo tray. This is for their trimmer servo, but it works for any aftermarket servo. And it's got the 1, 2, 3 mounting locations here on the rear for your uppers. So again, that gives you a little bit more adjustability on your caster, which is great. Then the last item here, which I think is also essential for the comp frame, is the servo limit strap mount. So this guy is super handy, love it. Especially because you usually have double barrel long shocks on these guys. So it's a great way to kind of tuck the whole body down and control that, you know, shock length. But anyways, I'm going to tear into these 6 bags, but you know me, nothing is going to say a stock assembly. So we're going to get into these axles. We're going to tear them down a little bit and rebuild them up. So why don't we take a look at some of the surprises we're going to throw at these guys. Well, what do we have here? This looks like a beautiful black box from one of my favorite places. So now we've got some more non-Lgrp parts for this build. And these guys are definitely going to spice up those axles. So a few new parts that I'm trying out. So these are the Hind flow skids. This is the skinny. And you can see I picked up the Driveline, and just a really nice looking piece here. Comes with a bearing, but it gives you that nice skid basically from the rear of the diff, covering the transition there to the drive shaft. So a really nice little element there for performance. So what's next here? And look at this, we've got another Hind flow, but this time we've got the fatty. So you can see how much wider this guy is, but again, comes with a bearing, just looks super nice, nice shiny Driveline. So can't wait to try those guys. What else is in here? Oh, look, as usual, we get a little free gift here. So I got a nice little scale 3Flow9 cooler. I don't know if that's going on this build, but always happy to have scale items. And then I guess this is the big boy of the show here. It's one of my new favorite items, is the roller bearing steering link. Now, one of the reasons here to use it is for all these roller bearings, for a nice little transition. But the second reason is because of this nice extreme bend here. It gives you a lot of clearance at the diff, which allows a lot of layover with your steering. So a lot of times now when you put in nicer axles that allow better steering, you can't achieve it with typical straight steering links. So you need that offset. So we'll move that to the side. And speaking of axles that can steer, we've got another one of my favorite little substitutions. So these are the Exo.US titanium axles for the Super 8s. So again, I've used these quite a bit. These are great little U-joints, and they give you, I want to say, like 55 degrees somewhat of steering. So just a lot of layover with these guys. So again, that's why you need to have a steering link setup that will allow for something like this. So all of these guys ought to add some nice bit of spice, if you will, to those axle sets. And I'm not even done. I've got one other awesome surprise for these axles, but I think we're gonna hold that until I get them assembled. So you know what that means. I'm gonna get to work. So I've got the fatty Hind on here. Just super smooth transition right there. Looks gorgeous. Just a really nice Driveline piece. Got a little udder butter in there and popped on a stock drive shaft just so I could test this out, make sure there's no binding, but it is just buttery smooth, as you can see there. So then that leaves the link mount, and you can see it's not on there. So that's for good reason. So first off, let's look at that Hind. You can see it's about 4mm thick for that Hind cover. So it just basically extends the cylinder shape of the diff out a little bit thicker. Now, if we look at little guys, diff cover. See if this will focus. When we turn it sideways, you can see it just has a little lip and then it drops drastically, basically flat right there. So their link mount kind of does the same thing. You can see it's got the curve, but then it's just got a little notch there at the front and then it goes flat. So that little notch fits over that little notch and these guys mate perfectly. But it sits a little cockeyed on this guy. So basically I think I'm gonna have to take the sanding wheel and elongate that notch just a hair to get this guy to sit down flush. It's just kicked up just a bit in the front. So that should solve that. So I'm gonna come back and hopefully have that mounted. Here we are back in action with a complete rear assembly. So as you see, a little bit of Dremel work and we got that link mount seated on top of the diff there just perfectly. So as always, take your time, and if screws aren't threading in, don't force it. Back it out, take a look, investigate, because you may need to do a little modification just like this to make it fit perfectly. But nothing hard about it at all. Just take your time, watch what you're doing. But this looks like it's gonna be a beauty of a rear axle and definitely has a little more weight to it. Although this is just Durlin, it is definitely quite a bit heavier than that little bitty aluminum diff cover that was on here. So I think now that we've got this rear assembly out of the way, let's move on to the front. Back with a big mess on the table and definitely not a complete modded assembly here. So I've run into my second little issue, and this has nothing to do with the Hind skid, obviously this time. So I'll tell you what it is. So I've got the stock drive shaft over here, the CVD that you get from Little Guy, so we can look at this layover. So not bad at all, but you can see the gap to the axle. So this guy is the Exo Axle, and it's got the outer bearing in the axle removed as they instruct you, and I typically do on these guys. So let's look at this layover. So it is not even as good as the stock CVD, and even on the backside. So these are getting closer. So something is definitely wrong here. These Exos should just lay over and touch the axle and still free spin. So right now, that's the max point. I'm just gonna hold it there and turn it. And you can see it already bucking. So it's already hitting a bind point, and we have worse steering than we started with stock. So definitely an issue here. I will say these are the V2 Exo axles, and I've installed probably 6 or 8 of the V1s, and the V1s are silver. You know, they're still titanium. These apparently have some coating on them because they're black, as you can see. But I've only installed one set of this on my latest build, and that was the 24 YEP cheat code WT Micro FJ build. And on that one, I kind of brushed over this, but I do remember having to back off my dual rates on this front end about, you know, to like 68%, which is really backed off. And, you know, I did remember not getting all the way to the frame, and I kind of brushed over it and didn't really think about it. But now I think it was the same exact situation I'm encountering here. So I'm gonna dig in, do a little troubleshooting. I'm gonna leave the stock installed here so we can compare, and I'm gonna go to town over here with a little troubleshooting. I've already got some ideas, but hopefully I can get this fixed here, address my prior build, get that one fixed. Back with our first step in troubleshooting here. So let's take a look at this Exo layover. So look at that. We are now touching here. Look at that. So let's lay it over and spin it and see if there's any bind. So no kicking at all, no bucking. So just perfectly smooth there. So how I did that, if you'll notice, there's 2 bearings now on the table. So I've removed the inner knuckle bearing, and that's all good, except for the axle can now pull all the way to the face of that inside knuckle and disengage completely from the diff. So that's not gonna work, but what that is telling me basically is that I need a little more give to let this axle move outward, and that will allow this layover, because when I fully push it back in and engage it, I'm getting stuck again. I'm not getting there. Let's see if I've got it actually engaged. Yeah, you can see it's not getting that layover. If I pull it out just a hair, there I am. So I guess that's the issue because of this black coating on the V2s. They're a little out of spec from the V1s. So I think to solve that, I've got these brass competition bushings from Mofo. So these are solid brass. These are the same exact size as the stock bearings. So the stock bearings are 2.5 millimeters wide, 6 millimeters outer diameter, and 3 millimeters inner diameter. So I'm gonna try to just get these on some sandpaper, thin them up a little bit, test fit as I go, and see if I can get a solution that's gonna work as basically a custom bearing or custom bushing on that inside face of the knuckle. Well, great news. A little bit of sandpaper, not much work, and I've got a thinner bushing here. So I pulled out the calipers just to check the stock. So I said they were 2.5 millimeters and they measure out basically right below that, 2.49. So let's take this thinner bearing that I just sanded down. Let's see where we're sitting. So 1.63. So I went a little bit further than I was trying to. I was trying to just go to maybe like 2, take off about a half. But let's go ahead and pop this guy in and see what effect that has on the axle. That may have been the fix. So I've got the sanded down bushing in there, and look at that layover. So no issues, and you can see it gives that axle just a little bit of wiggle, but pulled all the way taut. We are still engaged and spinning, so it's not disengaging with the axle. So that's great. So let's lay it on over here. We're pulled all the way out, and look at that, smooth sailing, no bucking. So that seems to be the solve there. So it sounds like Exo needs to update their website and tell you you need to remove this outer axle bearing, but you need to replace the inner knuckle bearing with a thinner bearing. So the next thing, instead of just sanding down bushings, which most people don't have these competition brass bushings, and you can't obviously sand a bearing down, I'm gonna look and see what's offered, what I can find as far as skinnier actual bearings that will fit these knuckles, because I swear that I've seen those. Well, we did a little time jump. It's been no time for you, but a few days for me, and Hobby Park coming through. So as I thought, I had seen these guys on Amazon. So these are actually 2 millimeter wide, and you get, I think, a 10-pack here. So these are just a hair skinnier. Let's see if I've got this zeroed. So that is zeroed. Let's see what the true measurement on these is. So the same as the others, just a hair under 2, so 1.98. So this will be taking basically that 0.5 millimeter off. So I'm gonna now swap this in the knuckle, see if that solves it, and then boom, we have a purchasable bearing solution for these guys. Looks like this has been another successful troubleshooting exercise. So look at that, with the 2 millimeter bearings in there, so just perfect. So just a V2 quirk there that I guess they did not pick up on the Exo side. So I may reach out, contact them, and let them know to put that on the website as well, but that's the solution. And I think we always have known that you need to give these U-joints a little bit of room to work. That's why you have to take out that outer axle bearing, but I guess that coating just made them a little bit longer, a little bit too snug, but problem solved. So great news. We're actually going to move forward with this front axle, and I can still recommend Exo Axles with this little, caveat, I guess. Now that's one good looking axle assembly. Of course, we're not fully complete. However, we are fully functional, and that is important. So not a lot to getting this guy together, no big hang-ups, but one note: to get this tray to fully seat, I did have to back out the screws in this Hind skid, just a hair, then that would seat fully, these guys would go in, and then I snugged it back up. But other than that, no big issues really on assembly. But you can see I've got a guest rig out on the table, and I've got that out here for good reason. So one thing I noticed on these are V2 rod ends, which I think I've used one set before, but they have now V2 pivot balls. So these are actually now recessed. So you can see the hardware just drops in there flush. So super nice. And then the V2 rod ends, you can see right there. So this guy is a V1 setup. So you can see the difference in the rod ends. Let's lay this guy over. It's getting all the way to the back, all the way to the axle right there. And these, of course, are the silver V1 Exos. But you can see the hardware does stick up on this old version. I mean, I don't think there's any difference in functionality. They've just kind of beefed up. Looks like the rod ends made them look a lot better. And then, of course, now you've got that nice flush hardware. So nice little improvements, step by step, little by little. I like that. You make a good product and then you just refine it. And that's what they've done here. So I think with that said, we're going to move on to a few other little surprises for this front axle. But before we move on, as you can see, I've got another guest rig out on the table. So of course I had to get into this one and rectify the same situation with the V2 Exo axles. So now I actually can get full layover to the axle. So I've actually got this readjusted. So we'll just turn it on and demo it and get a little bit of a sense of what we'll be getting later on in the build from this rig. Let's get this guy turned on. There we go. So let's look at this now. So before I had this at 58% for the dual rate, and now I'm up at 80. Look at that layover. No issue right there. We'll zoom in just a bit. Look at that, smooth as butter. So one thing I found on these axles, and I implemented it on the current build, is when I installed the thinner bearing, I had a lot of slop here, and that's fine because it wants to be in the outward position. But you can see I actually slid a little O-ring behind the hex. See if it'll focus there. But it basically keeps that axle from sliding back in, and that's of course where you don't want it. So you want it pulled out taut. So I just slapped those on there. This is one of those O-rings, 4 axles, so a little thicker, but that took out any in-out slop. So I took that same thought and came over to the current build, and these just have like a shock O-ring. There wasn't near as much gap on these guys, but again, it just keeps that axle from ever wanting to slide in and potentially get caught and bind. But I think it's gonna be smooth sailing from here on out, and I'm super happy to get this guy taken care of as well. So great little fix there. So it looks like we're actually gonna get back to whatever we were doing. Oh yeah, we were doing a build, weren't we? Okay, back to the build, or builds, that is. So as you can see, I've got quite a few guest rigs back out on the table here, and that will provide a nice segue into this next part. So as you can see, I've got an RS100 sitting on the table here. So it's quite beefy, use this quite a bit and really love it. So you can see the specs right there. This thing is no joke. So what I've got on the table here is basically an array of all the colors here that I own so far of NSD-RC. So the black to the red to the gorgeous orange. Move around to that beautiful purple, this fantastic blue, and we keep on coming to this St. Patty's green. So it just, all the colors of the rainbow right there. So the question to you guys, again, place your bets. What color servo is going in this Midnight Edition? What do you think is on the other side of this case? So I'm not gonna flip it, I'm just gonna install it. All right, are you ready? I'll tell you what, this thing looks awesome. So if you guessed the color pink, then you were correct. So this is the one remaining color, I believe, I did not have in the collection. So this is their breast cancer awareness version, and I believe they only offer this like a month or so out of the year. So you can see it's got the 2 ribbons there, and then if you look very closely at the 100, you'll notice something different about the zeros. But that's pretty funny. So it's super cool that they do this, and I love that it's like reverse anodized, so the case is all pink rather than just like the highlights. So a lot more color pop than the other servos. And of course, I'm sure a portion of the proceeds of this guy goes towards the cause. So that is super cool they do that. So I think now that's all the colors that they make currently, but I think it's definitely going to bring a little pop to this solid black midnight frame. And with that, I think we are just about done with the axles. But before we move on, as you can see, I've got the old scales out here, kind of half working, half not, but I've got two scales working, so I'm gonna get a baseline on where we sit with these assemblies here. Let's get the rear on there, looks like 38. So get this front pretty much on there. We're sitting a little over double of that rear axle, so pretty good there. I might want a little more bias, but I do want to check out where we're sitting just on the overall frame. Of course, no added brass, skid plate or anything, so that's all just aluminum plastic. So we're sitting at 92 basically. So a little bit heavier than the front axle, but we may be able to do something about this front axle weight because I totally forgot about brass knuckles. So I know I've got some somewhere in some boxes. So I'm gonna do a little digging, see what I can find. Back from the hobby room, quick rummage around, revealed 3 options here for knuckles, which is probably more like 2. So I've got these heavyweight brass hot racing knuckles set up for high steering, really nice, but I think I'm going to save those for some brass axles. Of course, we don't need that kind of weight up front. So these are just the little guy brass knuckles with the black coating, so same exact as the aluminum, basically shape and everything. So no difference there, but a little bit of weight gained. And then these guys over here bringing a little flare, kind of look like a disc brake, or at least the bottom portion of it. So these are ones that I actually forgot I ordered. These are from Mofo RC, fairly newer, and they're set up similar to low blows. So all that weight is down low. Very nice assembly, definitely feels pretty heavy there. So got the scales on. Let's actually see what the difference is here in these guys. Not quite double, but almost double for the Mofos. So I think that is going to lead me towards the Mofo brass knuckles, and another reason is these have traditional kingpin bushings. So that means I can use traditional hardware and swap it out for black hardware, which these guys have the recessed, I guess, shoulder screw? So it's got like a really wide head, smooth, but a little bit different, unique piece of hardware. So I don't have any of those in black. Although I do like the recessed nature. Everything is super flush. That is a great design feature, but I think for this guy, I'm gonna go ahead and swap out all of the hardware on the build to black hardware. Now that I've done the comp frame, of course, I only had the packet for the comp frame. I had a little bit of extra, but luckily the mail arrived. So I've got another little guy delivery here. So this is their refuel kits, and they offer these in gold, silver, and black. So of course, got the black. So you can see these get up to 10, and they've got black nuts as well. But you don't have your extra long ones that you typically need for spacers on shocks and links. So, and getting into skid plates. So I picked these guys up. So we've got the 12 millimeter and the, 14. So the big guys here. So should have plenty of length for anything with 2 or 3 millimeter spacers on it, which is nice. Always needing that long hardware. But with that said, I'm gonna make a quick swap here. We can reweigh these axles. Back with a quick knuckle swap and hardware switcheroo. So let's get this guy on the scales, see what that did to the weight. So as expected, it is heavier. So almost 103 grams. So that'll definitely help the bias of this front axle. And a couple notes on these knuckles. I did have to take the Dremel to the underside of the top and bottom mount, take a little material off to get these guys to slide onto the axle and rotate smoothly. Then I also had to sand out the bearing seats just a hair. And having some rolled up sandpaper on hand is a quick and easy way to just take a little bit of material off of those. Instead of fighting those bearings or getting them stuck in there, just a super easy way to do it. So great little tip there, but man, these guys are looking great with the blacked out hardware. Just a little bit of silver there in a key spot. And then of course, this beautiful pink right here. So I think with the axles knocked out, we are ready to grab a few more parts bags and keep moving. Figured it was about time to finish out this Driveline. So for that, I've got 5 more baggies from little guy on the table here. Nothing super exciting about a battery strap, but it is going to be required later on. And speaking of being required, we've got some parts that are definitely going to be needed to finish this Driveline. So I've got 2 of the drive shafts for the comp frame, 60 millimeters, so they're the same front and rear, no difference there. I picked up their all black, of course, MR24 transmission to use, and it does come with a nice brushless mount there set up for one of your mini brushless motors, but I picked up an alternate brushless motor mount that they now offer. So this is a 12 millimeter motor mount. So this opens you up to being able to use brushless motors that are like the pancake style. So that is exactly what we are going to be putting in this build. So speaking of motors, I've got my next non-Lgrp item out here on the table. So this is from Mofo RC. This is the Medio, otherwise known as MVP. So this is the medium velocity pancake motor he offers. So it's right there in the middle of the range between the slow motion and the Revenge pancake. So a nice little motor here. I've only used it once before, but of course I had to go with a nice blacked out motor for the theme, and I think that will work perfectly. And of course this does come with a really nice brushless mount in aluminum for a stock transmission, but of course we're not going to need that. So the only other item we're going to need to complete this Driveline really has nothing to do with the Driveline, but it's essential to get those axles hung to complete it. So these are some shocks that I put aside. I was going to use on another build, didn't end up using them. So obviously these are double barrel. These are the type with the divider, and they have 2 springs. So I figured this would be a good application on the comp frame. I believe these are 54 millimeter basically. So right there in the length I want to be. So we'll have to get some limit straps on there, control it all, but I don't think that'll be an issue. So I think with that said, I've got a little bit of work to do. We'll come back and see what I came up with. All right, back with a complete slider, and this thing is looking pretty sharp here. So good news on the motor fitment. I thought I was gonna have to flip the transmission and face it rearward, but you can see there, got plenty of clearance to the tray and actually way more clearance to the battery strap than with the little nano motor. So that's really nice. So still having that forward weight, and this is almost on center. It's a little more driver's side, but pretty close there. So I got this transmission greased up with a little udder butter, and of course blacked it out with the new hardware. So that is looking really good. So then shock wise, not super happy with these guys, fairly stiff. Not a big fan of this little divider collar. You can see it's kind of crooked. It never really wants to sit perfect. Like the front ones are sitting all right, but it just makes it look kind of janky. I don't know. So I started playing with limiting just to pull them down because they were kind of ridiculous, but I'd like to get it even lower. But we'll come back to the shocks, I think, in a minute. As far as the rear axle, you can see there that big fatty Hind, and I'm gonna go ahead and compress. So you can see it gets right there to those uppers. So that's one thing I had to compensate for, and you can see I had to move the upper link there to the middle position. So that took a little caster out of this rear axle, but nothing major there. And then as far as these Hinds, I think I figured out why they call them Hinds. So you look at this, there's a little lip right there. So it's great in the rear position or the Hind position. But when you put it on the back of a front axle, you've got this little lip there. You can see it. I can literally just catch it there. So that does not seem very good. It doesn't seem like that's going to slide at all. Once you get over that, of course it's smooth, but that seems like a little bit of a hang up. So maybe these guys were really meant to be on the Hind of the truck. So what I'm thinking is, since this guy has black brass axles, I'm thinking about taking this Hind, moving it to the rear, taking that black brass diff cover, swapping it in here so we get a smooth front transition, and then we get the benefit of the Hind on this Brawler Midnight build. So I think a little bit of switcheroo there, and that will take away that little lip. we'll lose one of them, but hey, we've still got this big daddy in the rear that's gonna come in handy. So that's pretty sweet still. And then of course I got my battery strap in, and I wanted to do that just with motor fitment. So I ended up being able to fit a stock battery and then like a big square 3S. So I will set this up for either one. So that was kind of critical. But again, I wanted to have that weight in the front if possible, rather than along the sliders. But I can still put Velcro as an option, but it's always nice. I like to have that weight as far forward as possible. So I think with that said, we're gonna swing back to the shock conversation. And for that, I've got to get out this big box here. All right, we got a little bit better view. So this is one of my other parts storage boxes, very handy. But you can see I've got just stacks of spring options, and I like to label my spares. So hot racing, long travel oil, same thing, Enduro oil. So I know what they came off of, so I can dig around in here, and I think I'm gonna have some options for springs. So I've got some telescoping right here. So the thought is to potentially just lose this upper and let this retainer, always be taut up to, instead of being pressed down, and put a longer spring at the rear, or at the bottom, I guess, and just have one spring in these guys. And maybe that will loosen them up a little. They just seem really stiff. And I could not find a difference between the upper and lower spring. They included like oddly 7 extra springs rather than 8, but they're all silver. They all feel similar, so not sure what's going on with these springs, but usually they're different colors like all the rest. So it's really easy to identify, your soft, your medium, your firm. But anyways, I'm gonna dig through some of these spring bags and try some options and see if I can find a setup that's actually gonna make these shocks work for me. Well, that didn't take long, so I was super lucky. And if you've been in the hobby for 4 or 5 years, you may know Kinetic. So these guys were the inventor of the double barrel shocks. So you would buy these as a conversion to the hot racing or the stock shocks, but they were the original, basically long spring guys, along with the telescoping shocks, and they have some incredible springs. So luckily I had some still laying around. So I had 2 of the super soft, and these are some of the best, thinnest, softest springs out there. And there it went, here it is. Luckily, didn't go too far. And then I had 4 of the soft. So these are a little stiffer, but still nice and soft here. And the telescoping, these are probably 42, 43 millimeter length. I don't know. The originals, I don't think were super, super long. But anyways, that gave me a good setup here. So I've got 2 installed. I put the soft on the rear and the super soft on the front. So you can see the lean there compared to these double ones, both front and rear. So much softer. And you can see it's keeping this collar in the upward position, kind of locked there, keeping it nice and straight. And you can see how soft these are. These just stack down, super nice. And then these guys are the super soft. They're so soft, they can't even hold their shape, but they still will stack in super nice as well. But they kind of slinky a little bit because they are just super soft. But that's what it looks like, basically full extension. So it's still keeping this taut. So I think these are gonna work really nicely and much easier movement there than these guys. So I'm gonna go ahead and set up the other 2, and that will take care of the shocks, and then still a little surgery switcheroo to do here. Back with the V2 slider, and this guy has much more range of motion. So I'm just super happy with these shocks now. I think these are gonna give me just what I want here. They're not fighting it. I mean, it's still got slack up here where before it was just pushing it taut. Those springs were just so stiff. So really happy with that. And then flipping it over here, we have no more lippage. So nice smooth transition on the bottom of that diff. So that hind flow skid is actually now a true hind flow. So it did move over to the orange brawler build, and I'll flip this guy over. So I think that's an appropriate spot for it. And it worked out just perfectly with the caster of this axle. So it is rotated a little bit, and it gets really close to the driveline, but it slips over. And then of course, since this is the skinny, no upper link clearance issues at all. So I think that's an awesome swap. So I grabbed that diff, and lo and behold, that was an aluminum diff. I forgot that's how I set this guy up. Brass in the front, aluminum in the rear. So that's why I've got this guy back out on the table. This is the one that's got the brass rear axle. So I ended up swapping that aluminum one here and snatching the black brass to move over. And you can see the caster on this rear axle. So I don't think that 349 would have even worked as a hot swap here. So I think all of it worked out well in the end, and this guy got a few more grams than it had on that front axle. I think there's about a 3 gram difference between the aluminum and the brass front diff cover. But anyways, I think we are set up now with everything but the actual drive shafts. But before we do that, I think we're gonna get some electronics out, do a little motor testing before we hook everything up. All right, got the mat cleared for a little testing, but I figured we'd run through the electronics before we plug it in. So I've got the FuryTech Lgrp Combo Lizard Pro, and you can see that it's co-branded here. So no difference in the performance. I'll show you the specs. This is a 30 amp constant, 50 amp burst, and then it maxes out at a 6.5, 2.5 amp BEC. So we're gonna step that up a little bit with this NSDRC BEC. So this is 8.4, and it comes with the 3S balance plug-in, and then I've got the 3S to 2S converter that you can select to come with that. Then I've got my typical little 4-channel for the Fly Sky radio. Got this guy soldered up. It's a nice little unit there. And then you just pick out the plug you need from FuryTech when you order this. So I think I've got everything I need to get this kind of plugged up so we can get a motor spin up. Okay, got everything bound up. Did a little tweaking on the FuryTech app and set this motor to the mini Komodo on their setting. So same kind of pancake style for FuryTech. So I figured that's probably the best setting. So let's get this guy plugged up. And for now, we've got the BEC out of the equation. Just gonna give it a quick spin up here. There we go. Let's get this guy a little bit closer. Keep an eye on this motor. Nice and smooth. Of course, this is just on 2S. Nice and quiet. All right, so the motor checks out. So I think next step is drive shafts and getting this servo hooked up. We'll do another quick test. So I've got the servo centered up and adjusted. Of course, no BEC, so this is, I guess, 5 volt. Not too shabby. Getting a little tapping on that side. I may have to do a little more adjusting. Let's see if we can identify that. Oh, that may just be the hex actually on the table due to the caster. I think that's what that was. It's just so much caster when you full turn. The hex was just tap, 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 tap. But seems super smooth. And then you can see the layover there. You lean this guy up. So there's just a little bit of toe out, as you can see. So with toe out, you can't hit both of your stops, right? So typically you're gonna hit your back stop to your axle and knuckle right there. And it leaves me just a gap to the drag link to the axle. If you're squared up, you can usually hit both of those stops. So I found I'm basically at the max point, and the limit on this side, as you can see, is the bottom of the actual servo box. So you can see that horn gets right up there. It's not the horn, it's actually the drag link on the back. So I've got that stopping right before I kind of dig into the servo case. But smooth as butter. And you can see that layover right there. So it looks like no issues with anything. This just feels really good. So very happy with that. So I think now with everything tested, Gonna move in to the install phase, get that BEC integrated in, come back, and should have all this stuff tucked in. Here we are back after me making a complete mess on the work mat. However, I think it was well worth it. This seems to have come out quite nicely. Very compact, narrow there to the frame rail, so really, really nice layout. And I've said this before, sometimes it's a little more of a challenge when you've got more real estate, more options to figure out how you're gonna route and lay everything out. On the small chassis, they pretty much dictate what you're gonna do. But you can see here, I kept with the theme and tried to black out all the wiring as much as possible here. So staying with that midnight look. But man, I think this just looks phenomenal. And then of course, test fit multiple batteries. So typical longer cable, kind of stock battery, some of the 3S route right there, and there's basically no slack. And then if you've got a shorter 3S battery cable, it can come right here. These can tuck out. Again, just fits perfectly there without a bunch of extra wiring. So very concise. And then you saw I wired in the BEC. I've got the ESC just in the on position. So you plug in the battery, everything pops on, you're good to go. So rather than get a battery in it now, there's really no reason to retest it until we do something about that. All right, time for my favorite part of every build, and this is no exception. So I've got some more little guy on the table, a little bit of Injora here. So first off with the wheels, I've got what I think will work out really well for this midnight frame. So these are the matte black Ghosts. So I've had these for a little while, a great looking rim, nice open back face that'll work well with those knuckles. Brass rings, so a good bit of weight to them. And of course, black hardware, so staying with that midnight theme. And then this little bit of black here is something fairly new from Little Guy. So this is their refit, rejiggled grippers here. So I guess a V2 or a 2.0, if you will. So I've got some of their old versions, but decided to try some new ones. Then of course, we'll be swapping out this super soft foam in here for some of these Injora inserts, and these are their larger size, I guess the medium and the soft, or vice versa, I'll have to check. But that should fill those out nicely, being, I think these are 63, so some big boys for this build. Of course, I've got some Little Guy lug nuts to dress these up, and then I've got one other item not on the table, and that has to do with the performance of this guy. So one thing I've been very conscious about this whole build is the weight bias. So a little more so than any of the comp frames that I've built. And so with that in mind, I've got another set of these aluminum rings here. So we're gonna swap these out for the rear brass rings to lighten that load even more. So give this guy a very nice starting edge here with the good front bias. So I've got a few screws to turn. We'll come back, see what these guys look like mounted up. Back with these bad boys mounted up, and I'll tell you what, they look fantastic. So they complete that midnight look, and got that servo obviously up at 8.4 now with that BEC wired in. So super, super happy with most of it, but there are a few caveats. So one happy accident was removing that upper spring means it's not in the way for the tire to rub. So that's actually great, but you can see the tire's digging into that lower link. So it's pushing us up or it's gonna pull us down. So that's no good. And then I was just running it around on the table, checking out the overdrive here. So at slow speeds, you're gonna get the kind of clunking, there it goes. So backing up, it really wants to jack you up. And then of course it pulls you down as you drive forward. And at speed, it's almost like the dog pound. You can kind of hear the tire screeching a little bit. Let's see if I can get a better example. Yeah, oh, we're gonna have to do something about that. I mean, it just totally locks up there. Uh-oh. We may have hit our cutoff because I did not charge this battery. Let's see. Hope that's all that is. Some real world testing right here. We'll plug in another battery that's not charged, but it should have enough to be above the cutoff. Let's just plug it in and see. So that's all it was. All right, so diagnosed at least. Now it's time to do a little work. Back after a quick link adjustment, and that almost did it, but I had to back off my dual rate a little bit. And I'm golden here. So I think I was at 80 with the dual rate, and I'm now at 69%. So I had to come off it just a little bit, but it's smooth sailing. So I think that's gonna work. You know, there may be a little kissing here at compression on a full twist, but you know, it's not gonna be binding up as it was driving earlier. So I think I'm gonna be happy with that. So what's next? Well, what's the only thing missing here? You guessed it. We gotta get a body on this thing. Not much on the table, but a long way to go still. So there's a few more items here to complete this guy, all relating to the body and mounting the body and painting the body. So got some kind of cool stuff here. So obviously we're gonna use an X Factor clear body shell from Little Guy. It's the one and only comp frame body that I have not built yet. So that'll be kind of cool. And I picked up one other little treat from 3Flow9, and this is their 3-piece cage. So it looks like it's one piece, but it's actually got 2 aluminum panels on each side. So that's kind of neat. Let's see, these are actually aluminum. I believe you can get these maybe in some different finishes as well, maybe some different metals, but just nice. And it's kind of form-fitting, made for the X Factor body. So it's got that little bit of lean to match the back cab. Of course, we've got the masking and stickers for the body, but something new Little Guy has is actually a vinyl sheet here. So these are all specifically made for that X Factor body. So this ought to be fun, kind of figuring out, maybe incorporating some of these into the paint scheme. Haven't really set on that yet. I've been going around on colors and how I'm gonna do this body, this whole build. But moving on, we've got another item here for mounting. So this is the billet front body mount. And what I found on my Brawler build was I can actually glue in magnets in that triangular area right there. So it makes for a good base for a magnetic mount. And then of course, I've got kind of a stack here that every good builder should have of multiple size magnets here, different thicknesses, different widths. So those will come in handy. So I think the first thing is maybe a quick mock-up here of this body and see what kind of trimming we're gonna have to do. Quick mock-up here, and of course you can see I've got the other Little Guy rigs out here in the background. We'll get to those in a minute, but it looks like initial thoughts here, we're gonna have to do some massive trimming. So one thing that kind of shocked me about this body is it is really cut differently than they show it on the Little Guy site. I think every picture I've ever seen it has like a really big arch back here. So you can see how much forward that wheel well is of the axle. So that was real similar on the Brawler. I had to kind of extend that back to make it look right. And in the front, you can see with these super soft, we're basically sitting all the way down. I may have to put those springs to soft, get them up a little more like the rear, but regardless, that's our full travel right there. So you can see we're below the tire, and this guy can turn basically to the frame edge of this front bumper. So you can see the trouble we're in with the fender and the headlight. It's not looking good there. So this is gonna take some really creative trimming, I believe, to make this body work without downsizing the tires. So let me move this guy out of the way. So I ran into something similar on this build. And of course, it's got the same kind of wide body, the headlights, the wide fenders, and so you can see the frame edge kind of bumper. So again, we get right to it, but because of this body, I had to downsize the tires. So I basically got 3 sets of tires for the buggy where there's all kinds of clearance. And then I've got 3 sets of alternates that are all smaller that have clearance with this body here. And I should have picked up on that just because this is my most recent build, and you can see this banana boat. So it's super pinched right here to the frame. So it works super good, kind of out of the box. Very minimal trimming there, but you can see we're gonna need that kind of clearance. And so unfortunately, the tire is where the X Factor headlight is. So this whole grill is pinched where ours is not, but we'll actually pull the X Factor build over here. So this is the same shape, and you can see this cut into the frame, and again, same size tires. So we're up above where the hood, plastic, and fender would be on the body right there. So that's letting me know that we're gonna get really, really creative with this truck. And I don't think switching the springs would matter because at full flex twist, we're still gonna have the same issues. But as far as the look of this thing, I think it looks pretty sweet. It is gonna need some adjustment, but it's a good starting point. It's definitely a lot wider than something like this guy. Let's get these guys kind of head on. You can really see the difference here in body width. So I would say this is probably a much more comp-friendly body out of the box, but we're gonna transform this guy into a comp-friendly body as well. But just something to know, this does not come cut anything like it looks on the little guy's site on any of their photos. But anyway, still a nice body, and I'm super pumped to get into those vinyl masks. So those are all gonna go on the inside. They're all mirrored, right, for the lettering. So that'll be a new experience trying to apply vinyl on the inside of a tiny body. But I think before any of that, I'm gonna have to mount the rear bumper to the body so I can get proper position, maybe look at magnet height, and then start into the trimming. Back with a little bit of progress here. So as you saw, got my cage trimmed, ready for my kind of front magnet mount there. And then I got the hinge on, and boy, this body, you really have to squeeze it. It's quite a bit wider than the rails. You really got to squeeze it, pull it forward to hook there. So once it's set, it's got a lot of tension. So that tells me those magnets are going to have to do quite a bit of work here. Let me open this guy up here. So you can see I've got the big vacancy at the front there, getting ready to set it up similar to this guy. But after test fitting, with it hinged on there and getting some magnets slipped in, it's gonna take a different magnet setup than this brawler body. Just the way the hood comes down, it's a little tighter, so I can't stack as many above. So let's get this up here. So you can see my solution was to stack more kind of below. So that wide, thin one is gonna be my top surface. So I'll assemble it here. So let's just say this guy is sitting. So I'll have that top wide one glued down, and then this will be my body under hood side, the big guy there. That I think that's a 2x8. But I don't think that's gonna be enough holding power. So then below, I've got this, I think it's a 5x2 and then another 2x8. So I can go right there because that 5 is skinny enough, and then that 8 will give it some more holding power. So now I've got a pretty thick stack that's still basically flush with the bottom of that mount. So it should give me plenty of holding power there. So I got a little bit of gluing to do there to get that ready. And I've got still quite a bit of chopping to do. So that's kind of the update. back after quite a bit of work with basically a full ready to paint mock-up, or ready to mask, if you will. But very extreme chop job, as you can see. And I did lose the lights as expected, got this narrowed up to that bumper, but that's what it's gonna take. As you can see here, let me get it twisted. And I tried to keep a little fender flare, and I basically ended up with just keeping just a hair bit of fender flare, not much. I kept having to inch that off for clearance right here, but it's just kissing it. And then the back, I think, just snakes by with that big arch right there. And I will say, with doing extreme cuts like this, it's very hard to get the body symmetrical side to side. That's kind of a challenge. So what I recommend is taking a little cut off of one side and matching that same little cut on the other side and kind of working them into shape together. And all I used really was curved scissors and a fresh X-Acto, because sometimes you just can't get the scissors across a body fold or somewhere the Lex hand's really tough. Sometimes you just can't get the scissor to turn or your hand in the right position, so you have to pull out with the scissor approach and come back with a nice X-Acto and just shave it off, which, be careful, because you can just jam this too far and make a cut that you didn't want to do. But if you take your time and go, one side over to the next, it's a lot easier to get a nice symmetrical cut. And I think this came out really good from what I can tell. The hood being, of course, the most challenging part of this. But I think it came out really well, and you can see I got the roll bar fitted on there. I will say that was a little challenge too, because you can't drop a pin in the hole from the top and mark it. So you got to do it from the bottom. So I took out the side panels, taped one side kind of square with the rail as far up as I wanted it, and then went to the bottom, marked them, screwed them in, and then this side I could kind of flex into position, get square, tape it down, and then do the same thing. And then of course put those side panels back in, but those look great. So very happy with this. And then the final thing was getting those magnets glued into their mount, and I've got the one like hood magnet set in there. So it's nice doing this with a clear body. You can see, the clearance there. We're just perfect at that magnet. So really nice, rather than having to guess with it all painted up where you can't see through the body. And then all of these guys here are the MVPs of this process. They're a bunch of sanding sticks. I usually use a different brand, but I found these at the hobby shop for I want to say $12 for all of these different grits. So great value with these Eco Powers. I use the 600 a lot and the 400, but that's just kind of finishing it off, making sure it's all smooth. And then you can always finger test it here. Make sure it all feels the same side to side, nice and smooth, nothing catching. But as I said, I think we are ready to wash this body, kind of disassemble some of these parts off of it, and then mask it up for paint. All right, back with a little more progress here. You can see I've got one of these vinyls on the side laid down, and I'll tell you, kind of a little difficult here. You can see you're flying blind unless you backlight it. So I guess because the backer is the sticky side, that's on the outside, which is what you're trying to visually see, applying it from the inside, if that makes any sense. But you can still do the hinge method. I've got it taped here in preparation for that. That's exactly what I did here. So I got it taped down, and I kind of use this to measure up to the stripe, make sure I had it straight. And then you can fold it back, clip the backing, slip that out, and then lay this down, and you've got that nice and stuck. Peel this up, do the same thing, kind of roll that down, and there you go. You're ready to peel this backing. So I've got the other one on there, prep for that. The tailgate, let's see, you can't even see it there. I pulled the backing. I did that a little different. I just peeled the whole backing and laid it down, by hand, and one good shot, and I was lucky there. Got that basically perfectly on, but was not going to risk it with these guys. They're so long, and you can see I did have to trim these up just a little bit. I've got some little remainders here. But one nice thing about these, they have a grid on the back, and you can see they're in alignment. They're not necessarily laid over the grid in the same spot, but it aids you in cutting a straight line. So that's the progress. Paint is ahead. Back with some good news and some bad news. So the good news is it looks pretty good. The bad news is it looks pretty good. It's not perfect, unfortunately. You can see here the sanding stick marks, the overage from the underside did not get covered up by the paint, unfortunately. So I thought, you know, the paint would just cover up scuffs and things like that. I guess those were too deep. For the bed, it's not really an issue. I was planning on coming back from the outside and blacking that out just because it's much easier to do. But now the hood is making me kind of reconsider maybe coming up with some kind of design graphic, something to maybe cover up those gouges on the side. Luckily, they're not in the center. So I'm gonna think on that for a minute, but man, these Lgrp vinyls, they came out super crisp. Very happy with those, just look awesome. So overall, very happy with this anodized pink, and you've got to back it in something dark, so I went with black. Of course, that made just 2 easy layers there with the vinyl masks. So I think I'm gonna go away, do a little more masking on the exterior, a little more painting, come back, and maybe I'll have some solution for this front hood. Back with a quick change up here, and you would never know there were any scuffs on this body. So nice and smooth, look at that, just gorgeous. So I had one scratch that came in pretty far towards the center, so that made me bring them both kind of in for this kind of black over fender look. But I think I can live with that. Definitely better than a bunch of scratches on the hood. So before I get to stickers, since I just painted inside and outside on this guy, I think I'm gonna let it cure up a little bit, maybe overnight, then get to some stickers, then maybe some other stickers, get that rack on there, and we're close to done. Well, here we are, fresh out of the body shop and fully stickered up with graphics. And check out that retro Lgrp sticker on the door. Just loving that guy. Got a little TRD or turd action, courtesy of Mass Designs. We'll swing it on around, get a peek of that pink servo. I think that's the first time we've seen the pink on pink here. So it's not an exact match, but I gotta say it's pretty close with that Tamiya sparkling anodized. But this thing is looking super good. We'll kick it around this way and get it dropped down. But I am just loving that. So I'm gonna get this up on a tripod. We'll get a little bit better view of all of the graphics. But just take a gander at that bad boy. A little more of a bird's eye view here, so you can start to see this hood layout. So I kind of mirrored that with some sponsor stickers. Got the Mofo on there for sure. Not a lot on this, but Little Guy and Mofo, and I guess the Power Hobby shocks and Fury Tech system in here. But this is pretty much a straight Lgrp rig. Of course, we got the 3Flow 9, the little Yeti guy representing there for the front roller bearing link and the diff skid. Look at that rear end, nice tail lights. We'll flip it around and we've got a different Yeti on this side, just strolling along. But I thought that silver popped out the aluminum here or stainless, whichever that is, very nicely. But the only thing I'm thinking about adjusting here is the front shock still. So I think I'm gonna switch to maybe just the soft springs rather than super soft. And of course I need to redo my limit strap. I have that removed because I think I'm gonna put in a longer one. But other than that, I think this guy is just about done. And I'm loving it. I think this thing looks super good. Just came out fantastic there. I guess we'll open it up here before we move on. I'll show you the magnet. So that worked out well. Put a little tape under there so I didn't get any bleed through on the paint. Don't want to have any more paint issues, but that seems to be holding just fine. little squeeze, pop down, and you can see that's right there on the bumper. So super happy with it. So I think I'm gonna make those front end adjustments, maybe get a battery in it, weigh it, come back, and we'll do a little testing. All right, nice and level as you can see after that front end adjustment and a little more underbody clearance. So we were riding basically about slammed without the limiter. So with the soft springs all around, I've got the same amount of down travel, still got tons of up travel. The front end is so much heavier, but does not affect the flex at all, as you can see. Let's see if I force it and if I don't. So it's not really affecting, just we got good front weight axle here that's gonna keep it planted no matter what. So the springs are no match for that or the limiters, but the limiters will keep the body tucked and of course the body from kicking up to some extent. So that's the advantage of those guys. But I think for now the stance is set, so let's roll into some testing. Feeling pretty good coming out of that weigh-in. So the whole build I've been pretty comp focused with the front bias and unloaded 57% front bias, and then either 2S or 3S battery 58% front bias. So pretty good, and sitting right there at the mid five, like 560 I think is what it was with battery. So pretty good weight range. I like to be in the 420 to 550 range. I feel like that's a real good competing range. And of course with this one, a lot of that weight is low and up front. So I think that's gonna benefit it. But without any more talk, I'm gonna turn it on. I've got a 3S in there right now, ready to go. Let's do a little testing. What the hey? Man, just as I got into testing, when you know it, had a little issue to solve. So I had a little bucking. I thought it was my steering rate, so I was looking at that, and then I noticed a little chug over here, and this is what I found. So I can get this off the stand, so you can see there at the knuckle, a little bit of silver. So that's not supposed to be there on a midnight edition. So what happened was the pin on this guy slipped and kind of came halfway out. So the solution was to put a little Loctite on each side, or not Loctite, but super glue on each side of the pin hole there. So it's that little guy that was trying to come out. So when that slides and it catches, that's bad news because that's a full bind up. So I'm glad I caught that. Hopefully this will fix it. Just be careful that you don't actually glue your joint and you still have good movement here. So I'm gonna let this dry up, get a Sharpie onto that, and then we'll be back to testing. All right, back together and ready for a little slow creep test here. So we're gonna have a little of the overdrive bump until we get a little slip, but that is not the axle hang up. That is just a Driveline wind up right there. But not really an issue in the real world. Once you get a little dirt, a little slippage. The gripper's getting some grippage. Just beautiful. Get a little shot under body here. Get this guy just creeping. Little tire wrinkle. See if we can get that belly to clear just perfectly there. This high clearance link's working out. And we lost ourselves here. We're gonna come back into view. Creeping on down. Man, just a gorgeous truck. Look at that bad boy. All right, we're gonna come back at it from the opposite side here. See if we can't get a little twisted. Get to check out the passenger side Yeti. Oh, that's a stretch right there. Let's reposition. Where were we? Let's keep this guy creeping. Man, just gorgeous. Stretching right on over. Let's see, we're hitting those links. Let's see if we got enough weight to wiggle us. Oh, we're gonna, there we go. Get those tires to bite. Slow it down here. Let's hit these ramps. Nice. A little close up as we descend here. Very nice, very controlled. Just loving this. I'm gonna come in on this corner here, a little bit different approach. See if we can't make it happen. Looks like these inserts are pairing pretty nicely with these grippers. There we go, getting that grip. Nice wrinkle. Look at that. And straighten up. Bring this on over. Ooh, little fast. Let's see if we can slow it down. Nice control. Oh, look at that. Easy does it. All right, one more time. Coming at it from this corner. Get another good wide shot of the climb. Let's check out this tire squish. So far, I'm liking this new style gripper. It seems to be living up to its name here. And definitely gripping. So we can get the belly over this time with this angled approach. I think we slid into that same little plastic pocket there. I'm gonna have to wiggle out again. See if we can't just slide it down this way. Keep it controlled. Very nice. I can live with that. So far, so good. But we haven't really checked on this roller bearing steering link. So we can just sit this guy on a ledge right there. Right up over. Now it's the axle that's got to get up over. There was the axle. Look at that. Are we going to climb this thing? Pivot a little there. Right up and over. And with that, I think we are at the completion of this build, but of course I had to get out this twin here, this almost skeletal version to sit here and compare to. But man, just both of these are awesome rigs. And even though this is my fourth little guy comp frame build, I must say I enjoyed it just as much this time as I did the first time. And if you haven't built one of these chassis kits, I definitely recommend picking one up, no matter what body you put on there. But just super cool. You don't have to blow them out with so much money, and I definitely recommend being a little more frugal than I am typically. But you know, I like to showcase some new parts to you guys, show you what's you know, the latest and greatest when I can. But anyways, I think now let's kind of focus on the build at hand. So pretty easy build, I will say, minus the little hiccup with figuring out the Exo V2 axles. And then of course, a little happy accident with the scratches there on the body. Took care of that, no problem. But otherwise, pretty straightforward as far as you know, putting together a nice functional comp build here. And I think this would be pretty effective in a comp situation. I don't really comp myself, but it's fun to kind of build with something in mind. Just look at this clearance here. That fender cut just ended up being so good. Just loving that. It's almost a reflection of the tire arc. But man, just super happy. This pink working so well, kind of filling out the full breast cancer awareness theme with the Servo. And these vinyls, man, from Little Guy, just take the paint to the next level. I feel like this could almost be one of their showcase trucks on their website. If you're listening, Little Guy, just kidding. But overall, I gotta say, just super happy with this guy. The anomaly, I think, is there's no lighting on this build, which is very odd for me. And then the other anomaly, I'm sure you all noticed, is no wheeled tire alternates for this build. But I guess we did have kind of a paint scheme alternate going on. But With that said, I want to say thanks for coming along on the build. And as always, I hope you enjoyed yourself and learned something along the way. Don't know what's coming up next. I will say I do have some cool stuff on hand, but I'm not going to commit to anything. But until next time, thanks for watching.